All right. You can see my screen okay? All right. Thanks for the intro, Gleb. So my name is Alex Gronemeyer. I'm a lead analytics engineer at Airbyte, which Gleb gave a great intro to, is an EL integration tool. So moving data from source to destination, usually the first step in your pipeline when you're using a tool like dbt. And I'm going to talk to you about how we are running dbt at scale. So our agenda will go over what data looks like at Airbyte with the data team and what our data stack looks like, some of the growing pains we faced, how we've scaled dbt, what we've learned while doing that, and then what we're excited about next. So jumping into data at Airbyte and our team structure, our company size is currently around 90 employees. So definitely startup, very different from some of the enterprise use cases. But for us, this is scaling quite large for where we were a year ago. Our data team has 2 people, and we run sort of a hybrid team structure right now. So the Fin team gave a great overview of central versus embedded data teams. We kind of have a mix of both. I'm the single analytics engineer in the engineering org, and we have a data analyst in our product org. We work really closely together. Might be hard to see, but there's a little dotted line there on the screen between us, and we collaborate really closely. And then we also take requests from the other business functions within the company. And here's what our data stack looks like today. So we bring in data from over 30 different sources. We're using Airbyte Cloud to extract and load different API and database sources into Google BigQuery, where we're running all of our dbt transformations. And then we're using Metabase for all of our visualization. That is where end users are interacting with our data today. So some of the growing pains that we face, scaling a startup comes with a lot of growing pains. So as I mentioned, we grew quite a bit over the last year. We this time last year had about 20 employees and now have 90. So that's a really rapid growth to almost quadruple the team size there. And then we also in that time started selling a cloud product. So that comes with a lot of requests for data and people who want to see how that product is performing. They want to see activation, revenue, lots of really important data sets, lots of eyes on the data team in that amount of time. And there were 3 common issues that we faced over the last year. So the first, we have a lot of really useful business tables, but people don't know where to find them or what they mean. People aren't always even familiar with the concept of a business table and why they should use it. So we have an enablement and education gap in the data that we're building. We also have a lot of people at the company who know what dbt is. It's talked about a lot at Airbyte. There's a lot of great partnership between the products there. They want to contribute, but they don't know how to get started, especially with our internal project. And so people want to contribute back, but with a small data team, we needed documentation to tell them how to even get started with dbt and what our structure looks like. Especially, this is mostly coming from the engineering org, so they might not have familiarity with a traditional analytics engineering pipeline. And then we also have people who are relying on reports in Metabase. But when we started building our dbt models, we would just run them daily. There wasn't a lot of intelligence behind how often we were running these or frequency, and that was fine at the beginning. It was unnecessary to run it more often than that, and it just brought up our expenses. But as we scaled, people were growing impatient with waiting 24 hours for the next dbt run for their reports to update in Metabase. So how we went about scaling dbt, the first thing that we looked at addressing was people not knowing what a business table means or how to use it. So we took advantage of dbt documentation. We started documenting all of our business tables and all of the columns within those business tables as a starting point. And then we're using the dbt Metabase package to push that documentation into Metabase so that it's centralized and lives within our source control. It's available in BigQuery and also available in Metabase. We also wanted to enable people to contribute to dbt. So we started out on DBT Core, but we actually recently migrated everything into DBT Cloud because this lowered the barrier of entry for people being able to contribute to our project, especially less technical teams who didn't want to go through the process of installing VS Code and different packages and things like that. So this was super helpful in just making DBT more accessible to the rest of the company. And then we also created a contributor guide, which is just stored in source control in our GitHub repository, and it's super easily accessible, lives within the code. So it's in people don't have to hunt for it in Google Docs or Notion or places like that. It's right where the code lives, and it tells you exactly how to get started in DBT Cloud, specifically with our Airbyte warehouse project. And then we also looked at improving our DBT runtime. So as I mentioned, we started out just running DBT once a day, and that was fine at the beginning. But if we wanted to run that more frequently, basically the cost would just scale linearly if we didn't make any changes to our models. So the first thing that we looked at doing is creating incremental models. So this is just an example of what that looks like in a few of our tables. And if you've worked with incremental models in DBT, they're awesome, but they're also, you have to be careful to make sure that you're not missing data that gets updated, that especially when you're joining with other tables, that you're aware of how those incremental models will behave downstream. So this is something that took a lot of thought and effort, and we didn't just make everything incremental. We picked specific models where it made sense, like our segment event tables, for example. And this improved our DBT runtime by 75%. So our DBT run was taking about 30 minutes when we were running it daily. And we brought this down to 7 minutes, which was enabled us to run it hourly and not worry about our costs, our cloud costs exploding. And some lessons we've learned throughout this process. So one of the most important things is just meeting our business users where they're at. So we needed to understand what problems we had with adoption of data at Airbyte and getting people to be more data-driven and self-serve. And we couldn't make those decisions in a bubble with the 2 people on the data team. We needed to gather feedback from our business users. We did this mostly in Slack and just meeting in person because we're a small enough company, but surveys would be another really great way to gather feedback from teams and make sure that we were solving the right pain points. Also, iteration is key. So we didn't roll out all of these changes all at once. We'd made small incremental changes over time and validated that it was the right direction. So with regards to documentation, for example, documented one business table, pushed that to Metabase, got some user feedback, incorporated that, and found that that was the right way to go. And then one thing that we learned, a little bit contrary to maybe what the direction we wanted to go in, but simple solutions were the best way to go. So there are a lot of really cool tools and strategies out there, especially great conversation in the previous presentation on CI. We're just not there yet. And actually adding in all of that CI and tooling now made DBT less accessible to other teams and like more intimidating for other teams who wanted to use it. So we definitely want to get to that point. But we had to scale some of that back for now to make DBT just easier for people to contribute and use. And then that kind of leads into the conclusion here around what we're excited about next. So we definitely want to grow our data team and our power users. I didn't mention this earlier, but we do, in addition to the 2 people on the data team, we have probably 5 to 10 power users also using Metabase and occasionally contributing to DBT. So we really want to continue scaling the people who are contributing to our DBT project. We also want to add more DBT documentation and tests. I mentioned we are documenting all of the business tables today. We also have tests, but they're really basic, null and unique checks. So those could be more robust. And as we encounter issues, like data quality issues, we make sure that we are building tests so that doesn't happen again. And then adding in observability and quality checks is definitely next on our list. one of the biggest pain points we have today is making changes in DBT and knowing if that is going to break anything in Metabase. So that's a huge gap for us today, and something that we would love to solve. And then, of course, I had to shout out AI. We're always trying to figure out how to incorporate, all the new advancements in technology into our current data stack. So that's really exciting, especially when you look at scale. There's a lot of leverage to be built in that area today. All right, thank you. That's the end of my slide there. I saw there were a few questions, so I can, great question on what is a business table. So that ends up being our final table in our DBT model that gets exposed in Metabase. And you can think of this as like, we use the one big table format. So everything is pre-joined. We try to be really intentional about the granularity of those tables. Column naming becomes really important because we want it to be very intuitive to someone who's not a data person to know how to use that table. And that's really meant to be like your access point into our data, especially from Metabase. And then as far as distributing DBT docs, that's a great question too. All of our docs are available in DBT Cloud, which is super helpful. So we have a lot of users who have like read-only licenses and are able to access those there. And then we're also using the DBT Metabase package to push some documentation into Metabase directly. And we've also experimented with data catalogs as well, which leverage a lot of our DBT docs. That was one of the places where I think we introduced that too soon. We're not ready for a data catalog yet. So it's a really great tool for the data team, but it hasn't gained traction with the rest of the organization yet. All right, checking any other questions.
The question from Lindsay.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of questions are you asking in the feedback sessions?
Yeah, it really depends on the audience. So if we're talking with engineering, those questions look really different. And I think where we found success is like walking people through the questions they're trying to answer and how they go about building that in Metabase. Engineering comes at it from a much more technical perspective, and they're more willing to like brute force SQL queries and try to get things working. Whereas like a salesperson who doesn't know SQL has a different approach to Metabase. So I think walking through their use cases is really helpful. Also, when we implement something like documentation, asking people what they think about it, showing them the documentation we created, and having them just give us feedback is really helpful. Occasionally I do Slack polls for that too. If I'm trying to be more async or reach like a wider audience, I'll say like, we introduced this new documentation. What do you think? And that's worked well occasionally too. We're a small enough company that I think it works for now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex.
Yeah.
Great talk. And